The average Canada pension plan, check a Canadian actually collects at 65, is about $925 a month, which is roughly $600 less than the maximum the government prints on its own poster. And almost nobody finds that out until they're already planning around the wrong number. Same benefit, same age, same country, but one of those figures is on the brochure, and the other one is the one that actually lands in your account. A guy I'll call Dave found that out the hard way last spring, sitting at his kitchen table in Hamilton at 64, 1 year out from pulling the trigger, bragging to his wife that he'd be getting the max because he'd paid in his whole life. And she just told him to log in and check. So he did. And there it was, $890. And he stared at it for a second before saying, "That can't be right." But it was right. And he'd built his entire retirement plan on a number that was off by $600 a month, and nobody had ever told him. Dave isn't an outlier, he's the rule, because the maximum CPP is $1,507.65 a month in 2026, while the average person actually gets $925.35, and that gap adds up over a 25-year retirement to a completely different life. The reason isn't bad luck either. It's baked right into how the system is built, and nobody at Service Canada is going to phone you to explain it. So let's do the math the government prints in the fine print, which means the real 2026 numbers for CPP. And old age security, why the maximum is nearly impossible to hit, the timing lever's worth tens of thousands, the clawback that quietly punishes the people who save the most, and what 3 actual Canadians take home at 65. By the end, you'll have the number your own retirement runs on, and I'd bet it isn't the one in your head, and the third person I'll show you surprises just about everyone, so stay with me for that. Start with the pension everyone thinks they understand, the Canada Pension Plan, which you paid into every single paycheck of your working life. And it came off the top before you ever saw the money, so it feels reasonable to assume you'll get the advertised maximum back. That assumption is where the whole plan goes sideways. The maximum CP retirement pension at 65 in 2026 is $1,507.65 a month, straight off the Canada.ca rate card. And that's the poster number, the one on every headline. Now here's who actually gets it. Because to hit that maximum, you need roughly 39 years of contributions at or above the earnings ceiling. And that's not 39 years of working, but 39 years of earning at or above the cap every single year, from your late 20s all the way to 65. That ceiling has a name, the year's maximum pensionable earnings, and for 2026 it sits at $74,600. So if you earned below that in a given year, and most Canadians did in at least some years, that year quietly drags your average down. Took a few years off to raise the kids, that pulls it down. Had a stretch of part-time work in your 50s, down again. Started a business that lost money for 2 years, and there goes another chunk. A layoff, a health year, a slow patch, every one of those counts against that 39-year ceiling. This is exactly why the average new beneficiary in January 2026 collects $925.35, the same number that blindsided Dave instead of the $1,500 on the poster. The average Canadian isn't a failure. The average Canadian just lived a normal life with normal gaps, and the formula punishes gaps. But before you spiral, understand what this number is not, because it's not a verdict on your retirement. It's one of 2 government cheques, and it was never designed to carry you alone. So let's add the second one, because old age security works nothing like CPP, and most people blur the two together. Old age security isn't a pension you earned by contributing, and you could have never worked a day in your life and still qualify, because OAS is based on one thing only, which is how long you've lived in Canada after the age of 18. That's it, and it comes out of general tax revenue, not a fund you paid into. The maximum OAS at 65 for the first quarter of 2026 is $742.31 a month, rising to $743.05 in the spring quarter. And here's the mechanic almost nobody explains clearly. Because you get the full amount only if you lived in Canada for 40 years after turning 18, and below 40 years you get a partial pension, 1/40th of the maximum for each year you actually lived here. So if you immigrated at 45 and you're now 65, you've got 20 years of Canadian residence, which is 20/40ths, or half. So you're looking at roughly $371 a month instead of the full $742. This catches a lot of people who assumed OAS was automatic and full for everyone, and while it is automatic, it isn't always full. Now put the two checks together for the average Canadian at 65, so that's $925 from CPP, plus the full $742 from OAS, which comes to roughly $1,667 a month, or about $20,000 a year, before a single dollar of registered retirement savings plan, workplace pension, or savings. That is the floor the government built. Breathe, because that's the floor, not the ceiling. And there are levers on it that most Canadians never touch, which brings us to the decision that quietly moves your cheque more than almost anything else, and that's when you turn it on. You don't have to start CPP at 65 because you can start as early as 60 or as late as 70, and the timing is anything but neutral, since starting early, before 65, drops it by 0.6% for every month you're early. So if you start at 60, the earliest you can, that's a 36% permanent cut. Permanent, as in not until 65 catches up, but for the rest of your life. Go the other way and delay past 65, and CPP grows by 0.7% for every month you wait. So if you hold out all the way to 70, you've added 42%, and it's locked in for good. Let me put real dollars on that, because the percentages tend to slide right off. Take that average $925 check, start it at 60 instead, cut 36%, and you're down around $592 a month for life. But start that same check at 70, add 42%, and you're up near $1,314 a month. Same person, same contribution history, and the only thing that changed is the date you signed up, but the spread between those two choices is over $700 a month, every month, for as long as you live. Old age security has its own version of this lever too, since you can defer it up to 70 as well, and it climbs 0.6% a month, which works out to a 36% bump if you wait the full 5 years. Nobody at the bank walks you through whether that math works for your situation, because there's no product to sell you on the other side of it. Now, delaying isn't automatically the right move, and I want to be fair about that, because if your health is poor, or your family doesn't tend toward long lives, or you simply need the money at 60 to eat and pay the mortgage, then taking it early can be exactly the right call. The reduction is real, but so is a bird in the hand. And remember, the government keeps every dollar of a cheque you delayed and then didn't live to collect. The point isn't that early is wrong, it's that this is a choice worth $80,000 or more over a retirement, and most people make it by accident, on a whim, in whatever month they happen to stop working. If you're finding this useful, take 2 seconds and subscribe, because I break down the Canadian retirement math the pamphlets skip every week in plain numbers. Now let's talk about the trap that hits the people who did everything right. There's a tax most middle-income retirees never see coming, and it's got a friendly name that hides exactly what it does: the OAS recovery tax, though everyone just calls it the clawback. Here's how it bites. Because once your net income in retirement passes $95,323 in 2026, the government starts taking OAS back at 15 cents for every dollar you earn over that line. And it gets worse the higher you climb, because by roughly $154,700 of income, your entire OAS is gone, clawed all the way back to zero. The cruel part is who this actually catches, and it's not the wealthy who planned for it, it's the retiree with a decent workplace pension and a healthy registered retirement income fund withdrawal, and CPP, and OAS stacked on top, who crosses that line without ever realizing a line existed. One good year, one big RRSP, withdrawal to buy the trailer, and suddenly a chunk of next year's OAS just evaporates. Now, most Canadians living mainly on CPP, OAS, and modest savings never come close to $95,000 in income, so this won't touch them at all, and that's genuinely most people. But if you're the diligent saver who built a real nest egg, this is the number that decides whether you keep your full OAS or hand chunks of it back, and things like pension splitting and pulling from a tax-free savings account, which doesn't count as income, are how people stay under the line. That's a whole video on its own, but for now just know the line is there and it sits lower than most savers think. So let's make all of this concrete, because averages are slippery, and I want to show you 3 real Canadians at 65 so you can watch which one you recognize. First is the average earner, so call her Susan, who spent 40 years in the workforce, mostly steady, with a couple of lighter years when the kids were small, and Susan lands right around the average. That's $925 in CPP, plus the full $742 in OAS, so combined she's at about $1,667 a month, or roughly $20,000 a year from the government, with a modest RRSP. On top, Susan is tight, but functional in a lower-cost town like Sudbury or Moncton, and genuinely stretched in a place like Toronto or Vancouver. Second is the maximum earner, so call him David, an engineer who earned above the ceiling for nearly 4 decades without a single gap, and David is the rare one who actually hits the CPP. Maximum, that's $1,507 in CPP, plus $742 in OAS, so he's at about $2,250 a month, or $27,000 a year, from the 2 government cheques alone. David is the poster, but David is also maybe 1 in 20 of the people watching this, so if you assumed you were David, this is the moment to check. Third is the broken career earner, so call her Marie, who immigrated to Canada at 42 and worked hard for 23 years, but started her Canadian earnings late and never came near the ceiling, so her CPP is small, maybe $400 or $500 a month. Her OAS is partial too, because she's got 23 years of residence rather than 40, so she gets roughly 23/40ths of the max, which lands somewhere around $427. On paper, Marie looks like she's in real trouble, and this is the one I told you would surprise you, because this is exactly where the system has a floor she doesn't even know about. Because for the lowest income seniors, there's a third benefit that quietly does the heavy lifting, and that's the guaranteed income supplement. S is tax-free and income tested, and it tops up the seniors who need it most, up to over $1,100 a month for a low-income single person so Marie with her small CPP. And partial OAS likely qualifies for meaningful GIS, and it lifts her total well above where her benefits alone would leave her. The floor is lower than it should be, but it is a real floor, and it's tax-free, which the RRIF income the wealthier retiree lives on is not. So there's 3 Canadians and 3 completely different checks, with Susan around $20,000 a year, David around $27,000, and Marie starting low but lifted by a supplement most people have never even heard of. And not one of them could have guessed their number from the government poster, because Susan assumed the max, David actually got it, and Marie assumed she'd get almost nothing before the supplement caught her. The only way any of them knew for sure was to look, which is the one thing I really want you to do, because every working Canadian can log into My Service Canada account right now and see their personal CPP estimate at 60, 65, and 70. That's your real number, not the average and not the maximum, but yours, based on every year you've actually contributed, and it's sitting there waiting for you to open it. I'll tell you what usually happens when people finally check, which is that the number comes in lower than they assumed, sometimes a lot lower, just like it was for Dave back at that kitchen table. That's uncomfortable for about 10 minutes. But here's why it's the most useful 10 minutes in your whole retirement plan. Because if you find the gap at 55, you've still got a decade to do something about it, whether that's RR room, or delaying your start date, or a few more contribution years near the ceiling, or a TFSA. That stays out of clawback range. But if you find the gap at 66, you're just managing the number you already have. The math is the same either way, and the only real difference is how much runway you've got left to change it. The government built a system where the advertised number and the real number sit almost $600 apart, and then it made you responsible for knowing the difference, which isn't fair and also isn't going to change. So you find your real number, you close the gap while you've still got runway, and you retire on math instead of on a brochure. Check your Service Canada estimate this week, not someday, because it takes 15 minutes and it's the whole difference between planning your retirement and just hoping for it. If this cleared something up for you, go ahead and subscribe, because the next number that decides your retirement is that RRIF, withdrawal quietly triggering the clawback, and they explain that one even worse than they explain this, so I'll have it ready for you soon.